they need help from whether it be the Premier League or the FA or the PFA and how to deal with this, because companies do it all the time. If you have a complaint and you send it.
He makes me sick. That is what you would expect Luther Blissett to say about the players he cannot forgive. But what if the truth is even darker than that? What if the real story has nothing to do with players at all? Luther Blissett is a legend, Watford's all-time record holder, 503 appearances, 186 goals. A hero who took the club from the 4th division to the 1st division in just 5 years. He scored a hat-trick on his England debut. He earned 14 caps for his country. This man is royalty at Vicarage Road, but somewhere along the way, a myth was born. The myth of the unforgivable 5. A list of players Luther Blissett supposedly hates, players he will never forgive. The problem is, that list does not exist. It never did. This is not a story about grudges. It is a story about principles. And the enemies Luther Blissett actually has are far more dangerous than any footballer could ever be. The media loves a grudge list. They love drama. They love clicks. So when you hear about a legend like Blissett, you expect conflict, you expect feuds, you expect names. But Luther Blissett does not work like that. He does not waste time on petty rivalries. His anger is reserved for something much bigger. It is reserved for institutions that betray their own players, for systems that protect the guilty, for cultures that reward laziness and punish discipline. These are the things Blissett cannot forgive, not people, principles. To understand why Blissett thinks this way, you have to go back to where it all started, back to Watford in the mid-1970s. Luther signed for the club in 1975. The club was relegated to the 4th division that same year. It was rock bottom, and the culture inside the dressing room was even worse. Blissett described it as a drink culture. Senior players ran the show. They dominated the dressing room. They had too much power. The manager at the time, Mike Keane, could not control them. The players were running the club, really. That is what Blissett said. Not one player, not 5 players. The whole culture. It was broken. It was unprofessional. It was holding the club back. Then in 1977, everything changed. Graham Taylor arrived. Taylor was different. He demanded discipline. He demanded hard work. He demanded standards. Blissett said Taylor was the best manager he ever worked under. Why? Because Taylor paid attention to details. He could coax whatever was in you out so that you could be as good as possible. He did not ask you to do things you could not do. He just made you better. That system saved Watford. It took them from the 4th division to the 1st division in 5 years. It gave Blissett a platform to become a star, and it taught him a lesson he would never forget. Discipline wins. Standards matter. Anything less is a betrayal. Think about what that means. Before Taylor, Watford was a mess. Players turned up drunk. Senior players had all the power. The manager had no control. It was chaos, and chaos does not win football matches. It does not get you promoted. It does not build careers. Taylor understood that. He came in and stripped away the nonsense. He made it simple. Work hard. Follow the plan. Respect the system. And suddenly, Watford started winning. They started climbing. They started believing. That transformation was not magic. It was structure. It was discipline. It was accountability. And Luther Blissett saw it happen with his own eyes. He lived through both versions of Watford, the broken one and the brilliant one. That is why he has no patience for players who waste their talent. That is why he has no sympathy for clubs that compromise their values. He knows what happens when you let standards slip. He watched it destroy Watford before Taylor arrived, and he will never let anyone forget what saved them. The Taylor revolution was not just about tactics. It was about culture. It was about creating an environment where excellence was expected, not optional, where every player knew their role, where every player understood that their actions affected the whole team. That mentality shaped Blissett forever. It became his identity. When he criticises the drink culture, he is not attacking individuals. He is defending the system that made him successful. When he condemns Andre Gray, he is not being cruel. He is protecting the standards that Graham Taylor taught him. Everything Blissett does comes back to that lesson. Structure beats chaos. Discipline beats talent. Standards beat shortcuts. That is why Blissett never forgave the culture that came before Taylor. Not the individuals, the culture, the laziness, the entitlement, the drinking, the lack of leadership. These were the things that made him angry, because he knew what the club could be. He saw what happened when someone like Taylor came in and demanded excellence, and he never wanted to go back to those dark days, ever. But Blissett's standards were not just about football, they were about survival. Luther Blissett was one of only 4 or 5 black players in the country during the height of his career. That meant he faced racism every single week. Fans called him names. They threw bananas at him from the minute the team stepped off the coach right up to the end of the game. It was constant. It was brutal. And there was nobody to complain to. Nobody cared. The authorities did nothing. The clubs did nothing. Blissett had to endure it alone. That kind of pressure changes you. It makes you tougher. It makes your standards higher. Because you know that every mistake you make is not just a personal failure. It is a setback for every black player who comes after you. You are a pioneer, and pioneers cannot afford to fail. Imagine carrying that weight every single match, knowing that if you had a bad game, it would not just reflect on you, it would reflect on every black player in the country. That every goal you missed would be used as evidence that black players did not belong, that every mistake would be magnified, weaponized, used to justify the abuse. That is what Blissett lived with. That is why he could never accept anything less than total professionalism, because the stakes were too high, the consequences too severe. He was not just playing for himself, he was playing for a generation, for a future where black players would not have to face what he faced. That responsibility never left him. It defined him then, and it defines him now. That is why Blissett works with organisations like Show Racism, the Red Card. That is why he is involved in projects like Team 48, which provides opportunities to black drivers and mechanics in motor racing. He knows what it means to be the first. He knows the responsibility that comes with it. And he knows that professionalism is not just about performing well on the pitch. It is about setting a standard. It is about showing the world that you belong, that you deserve respect, that you will not be broken. So when Luther Blissett criticises someone, it is never personal. It is always about the principle. And that brings us to Andre Gray. In 2021, Gray was a striker at Watford. He was struggling. He had only scored 3 goals in 2 seasons. His form was terrible, but that was not the problem. The problem was that Gray had twice breached lockdown protocol during the COVID-19 pandemic. Twice. Gray himself admitted it was stupid. He admitted he had failed in his position of responsibility. When Blissett was asked what he would have done as manager, his answer was immediate. He would have transfer listed Gray. He has to go. That was Blissett's position. Why was Blissett so harsh? Because it was not about football. It was about public safety. Blissett pointed out that there was a hospital right next door to Vicarage Road. The people inside that hospital risked their lives every single day to save and keep people alive. And here was a footballer earning thousands of pounds a week, breaking the rules that were designed to protect those same people. You cannot marry the two together. That is what Blissett said. It was a betrayal of the community. It was a betrayal of the social contract. And Blissett could not forgive it. But the real disgust came from what Watford FC did next. The club released a video interview with Andre Gray. It was meant to generate sympathy, to explain why Gray was struggling, to rebuild his reputation. And in that video, the club made a reference to Luther Blissett's old tabloid nickname, a nickname from his time at AC Milan, a nickname that mocked his struggles in Italy. The club used Blissett's name to buy collateral for Andre Gray. They were trying to shield Gray by comparing him to Blissett. They were saying, look, even Luther Blissett struggled with goals. Give Andre Gray a break. Blissett was furious. He called it shameful PR. He said the club was portraying his goal-scoring ability in a negative way. He said it was disgusting they did that. And then he made it clear. I was not the one who had a party for my birthday. That was the difference. Blissett never broke lockdown. Blissett never endangered the community. His struggles at Milan were about football. They were about adapting to a new league, a new country, a new style. They were not about breaking the rules. They were not about letting people down. For the club to use his legacy, his reputation, his name to defend a player who had failed ethically was unforgivable. Not because of Gray, but because of what the club did. They weaponized Blissett's legacy for cynical commercial gain. That was the betrayal. And this is where you see the pattern. Luther Blissett does not have grudges against players. He has grudges against institutions, against organisations that put PR above integrity. against clubs that exploit their own legends, against systems that protect the wrong people. That is what makes him angry. That is what he cannot forgive. Now let us talk about John Barnes, because this is where the myth really starts. In 1983, Luther Blissett signed for AC Milan for £1 million. It was a huge transfer. Blissett was the first division top scorer. He was wanted. He was in demand. Milan needed an out-and-out goal scorer, and Blissett fit the role perfectly. But things did not work out. Blissett struggled in Italy. He scored 5 goals in 30 games. It was a difficult season. The ball was not played to him with the regularity he was used to at Watford. The style was different. The culture was different. He returned to Watford after just 1 year. And then the rumour started. People said Milan had made a mistake. They said Milan wanted John Barnes, not Luther Blissett. They said it was a case of mistaken identity. 2 black players, same club. Easy to mix up, right? Wrong. The rumour is nonsense. Football historians have debunked it completely. Even the most ignorant and provincial person could see that Blissett and Barnes looked absolutely nothing alike. More importantly, Milan did not need a player like Barnes. Barnes was skillful. He was a winger. He was talented. But he was not an out-and-out goal scorer. Milan needed a striker, a target man, someone who could score goals. That was Blissett, not Barnes. The rumour persists because people love a good story. They love the idea of a mix-up, a mistake, a comedy of errors. But the truth is boring. Milan signed the player they wanted. It just did not work out. That happens in football. It does not mean it was a mistake. It does not mean they wanted someone else. It just means Blissett struggled to adapt. That is all. And here is the important part. Luther Blissett and John Barnes do not have a feud. They never did. Blissett was Barnes's early mentor at Watford. They worked together. They supported each other. They are still involved in community projects together, like Team 48. There is no grudge. There is no rivalry. There is just a media myth that refuses to die. But the myth did more damage than just annoy Blissett. In 1994, Italian cultural activists adopted the name Luther Blissett as a multiple-use pseudonym. They used it to stage pranks, hoaxes, and social commentary. They called it the Luther Blissett Project, and they chose the name partly because of the ambiguity surrounding the Milan transfer. They saw Blissett as a red herring, a symbol of media-driven confusion. They used his name to critique fixed authorship and challenge the media. It was meant to be political. It was meant to be artistic. But what it actually did was cement the myth. It made sure the story of the Milan transfer and the supposed mix-up with Barnes would never go away. The activists inadvertently guaranteed the rumour's survival, and that meant Luther Blissett's most difficult career moment would be dragged up again and again and again. Not because it was true, but because it made a good story. That is what Blissett is up against. Not players, not teammates, not rivals, but a media machine that prefers fiction to fact, a culture that values clicks over truth, an industry that will exploit a man's legacy for a headline. And that is what Blissett cannot forgive, not the players, the system. So who are Luther Blissett's real enemies? They are not on the pitch. They are in the boardroom. They are in the press. They are in the institutions that should protect their players, but instead exploit them. The first enemy is racism, the abuse Blissett suffered throughout his career, the bananas, the slurs, the silence from the authorities. That is an enemy he fought every single day, and it is an enemy he is still fighting through his advocacy work. The second enemy is institutional cynicism. Clubs like Watford, who used his name to buy collateral for a player who had broken the rules, who cheapened his legacy for a PR campaign, who put their reputation above respect for their own legend. That is unforgivable. The third enemy is laziness and entitlement, the drink culture that dominated Watford before Graham Taylor arrived. The senior players who ran the club into the ground, the lack of discipline, the lack of standards, the lack of professionalism. Blissett saw what that culture did to the club, and he saw what discipline did. He knows which one works, and he will never tolerate anything less. These are the things Luther Blissett will not forgive. Not 5 players, not personal grudges, not petty rivalries, but systemic failures, ethical lapses, institutional betrayals. Because Blissett is not defined by personal grievances. He is defined by his allegiance to the standards that Graham Taylor taught him, by his identity as a pioneer who had to fight for every scrap of respect, by his commitment to community, to discipline, to integrity. Luther Blissett does not have an unforgivable 5. He has an unforgivable system, a system that protects the wrong people, a system that exploits its legends, a system that rewards laziness and punishes excellence. And that is what makes him different. That is what makes him a true legend. Not just for what he did on the pitch, but for what he stands for off it. Honour, discipline, respect. These are the principles that define Luther Blissett, and these are the principles he will defend, no matter what, no matter who. Because for Luther Blissett, it was never about the players. It was always about the principle.